For over half a century, a small Illinois town lived with a question that refused to fade. What happened to Margaret Hamilton? A beloved teacher vanished into the night, leaving behind a running car, a single shoe, and a mystery that haunted generations. It would take 51 years, a forgotten letter, and a deathbed confession to finally uncover the chilling truth hidden in plain sight. It was a cold November night in 1957 when Margaret Hamilton, a 26-year-old schoolteacher from the quiet town of Carlinville, Illinois, vanished without a trace. Margaret was known throughout the town as a kind, gentle woman. She taught second grade at the local elementary school and was loved by her students and respected by the community. People described her as warm, intelligent, and always willing to help others. She lived with her older sister Dorothy in a small white house on Elm Street. The two sisters were close, sharing everything from household chores to late-night talks about life and their future. That evening, Margaret had attended a friendly gathering at the Thompson family farm a few miles outside of town. It was a small get-together, neighbors laughing, sharing food and enjoying the crisp autumn air. Margaret was seen chatting with friends and dancing. She looked happy, like someone who had no idea that this night would change everything. Around 10:45 p.m., she decided to head home. She got into her blue Chevrolet, waved goodbye to a few friends, and drove off down the quiet country road. The road was dark and nearly empty. There were no street lights, just the occasional farmhouse light flickering in the distance. She never made it home. The next morning, Dorothy woke up and noticed Margaret's bed had not been slept in. This was completely unlike her sister. Margaret was responsible and careful. Dorothy called the school, hoping maybe Margaret had left early. But when they said she hadn't shown up for work, panic set in. She called the sheriff's department immediately. Within hours, Sheriff Thomas Walsh and his deputies began searching the area. Around noon, they made a chilling discovery. Margaret's car was found abandoned on County Road 12, only a short distance from the Thompson farm. The engine was still in working condition, the driver's door was open, and one of her shoes was lying in the grass nearby. There were no signs of a struggle inside the car, no notes, no clear clue about what had happened. It was as if Margaret had simply vanished into the night. The news spread quickly through Carlinville. This was a town where people left their doors unlocked, where everyone knew each other's names. A disappearance like this was almost unthinkable. Hundreds of volunteers, neighbors, farmers, students, and church members joined the search. They walked through fields, combed the woods, and checked every barn, well, and abandoned building in the area. Bloodhounds were brought in, and they followed her scent for a short distance down the road, but the trail ended abruptly near the edge of the woods. For days, search parties worked tirelessly. Planes flew overhead, scanning the fields from above. Posters with Margaret's smiling face were printed and pinned on telephone poles, shop windows, and church doors. People whispered theories in grocery stores and on front porches. Some believed she had been kidnapped. Others feared a tragic accident. A few even wondered if she had chosen to disappear, but those who knew her well rejected that idea immediately. Margaret loved her family, her students, and her community. She had no reason to run away. Dorothy refused to give up. Every morning she visited the sheriff's office, asking for updates, offering to help, doing everything she could to keep the search alive. Her pain became the town's pain. Carlinville, usually full of laughter and simple routines, now felt heavy and fearful. Parents began locking their doors at night. Strangers were watched with suspicion. The community united, but deep down, everyone feared the worst. Weeks turned into months. Despite every effort, no solid clues were found. There were no witnesses who had seen her after she left the Thompson farm. No strange cars reported, no confessions or ransom notes. The investigation slowly lost momentum. The posters faded in the rain and wind. Life in the town moved forward, but the mystery of what happened to Margaret Hamilton lingered like a shadow. For Dorothy, the night Margaret vanished was a wound that never healed. She kept Margaret's bedroom exactly as it was, clothes hanging neatly, books stacked on the nightstand, a hairbrush still lying on the dresser. Every year on the anniversary of her disappearance, Dorothy lit a candle by the window, hoping somehow her sister would find her way home. Margaret's disappearance wasn't just a case. It became a legend whispered to new generations, the kind teacher who disappeared on a quiet road. No one knew then that the truth was much closer than they imagined, waiting for someone to uncover it decades later. In the days after Margaret Hamilton vanished, Carlinville changed overnight. A town that once felt safe and familiar was now gripped by fear, confusion, and unanswered questions. Margaret wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was someone everyone knew. She had taught their children, attended their church, and waved to them on her evening walks. Her disappearance hit the community like a shockwave. The morning after her car was found, Sheriff Thomas Walsh officially launched a full investigation. It was one of the largest the small department had ever handled. Deputies collected the abandoned car and carefully examined the scene. They found her blue Chevrolet with the driver's door open, the keys still inside, and one of her shoes lying a few feet away. The engine was off, but nothing appeared broken or damaged. There were no skid marks on the road, no signs of a crash, and no evidence of a struggle nearby. It was like she had stepped out of her car and disappeared into thin air. The first 48 hours are crucial in any missing person case, and the sheriff knew that. Deputies started interviewing everyone who had been at the Thompson family party the night before. Dozens of guests were questioned. Many remembered seeing Margaret laughing, dancing, and talking to friends. She had left alone, shortly before 11 p.m., saying she was tired and heading home. No one reported anything unusual. She didn't seem upset, worried, or distracted. Next, investigators spoke with her family. Dorothy was heartbroken but determined. She described Margaret's habits in detail, her daily routine, the routes she usually took, the people she trusted. Margaret didn't drink heavily, didn't take late-night detours, and never stayed out without telling her sister. It was completely out of character for her to vanish without a word. The sheriff's department expanded their search. Roadblocks were set up on major routes in and out of town. Officers stopped drivers asking if anyone had seen a woman walking alone that night. Farmers checked their fields. Barns, wells, and abandoned houses were searched inch by inch. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through the woods, calling her name. Local radio stations broadcasted alerts. Flyers with Margaret's photo and a description were distributed to nearby towns. Still, no solid leads came in. Witnesses reported vague things: a car they didn't recognize, a figure by the roadside, but nothing concrete. Some calls turned out to be hoaxes. Others were simply wrong. As days turned into weeks, the sheriff's office was flooded with hundreds of tips, but each one led to a dead end. The investigation also faced challenges that would seem unimaginable today. There was no modern forensic technology, no DNA testing, no security cameras on roads. Evidence collection in 1957 was basic. Fingerprints were lifted, but none matched any records. Tire tracks were photographed, but they belonged to dozens of common cars. Even the shoe found near her car didn't offer much. It was clearly hers, but it gave no clue about where she went or who she was with. Sheriff Walsh tried to keep the case active. He issued public statements every few weeks urging anyone with information to come forward. Margaret's photo remained pinned to the sheriff's bulletin board and on telephone poles throughout town. But as winter came, search parties grew smaller. People returned to their routines even as fear lingered. Dorothy refused to give up. She visited the sheriff's office almost daily, asking if there was anything new. She walked the same country road countless times, hoping she'd see something everyone else had missed. She wrote letters to newspapers, asking them to keep her sister's story alive. Her quiet determination became a symbol of hope in the community. Meanwhile, rumors spread. Some people whispered that Margaret had run off with a secret lover. Others believed a stranger passing through town had taken her. A few suspected someone from Carlinville itself, a person who knew the roads well and could approach her without raising alarm. But no theory could be proven, and with every passing month the trail grew colder. By the end of 1958, the case had reached a painful standstill. Files were stored away in the sheriff's office basement. The annual reminders would come. A reporter might ask a question on the anniversary. The sheriff would repeat the same statement: "The case remains open. Any new information will be investigated thoroughly." But behind those words was the sad reality. The investigation had no direction left. For Dorothy, this silence was unbearable. For Carlinville, the case became a ghost story, a mystery with no ending. Margaret's smiling face remained in faded photographs and on old posters, a reminder of a night no one could forget, but no one could solve. As the years passed, Margaret Hamilton's disappearance slowly faded from the headlines, but it never truly left the hearts of those who had known her. What began as a massive search and investigation in 1957 quietly turned into a painful mystery that hung over Carlinville for generations. The case that once filled newspapers and radio broadcasts was now reduced to a single file collecting dust in the sheriff's basement. Sheriff Thomas Walsh, who had led the original investigation, retired in 1973. 5 years later, he passed away from a heart attack. He never solved the case that had haunted his early career. His successor, Robert Clark, would sometimes pull out the Hamilton file whenever a reporter called on slow news days. Around the anniversary of her disappearance, he would issue the same official statement: "The case remains open. Any new information will be investigated thoroughly." And then, like clockwork, the file was placed back in storage and forgotten until the next year. Meanwhile, the town of Carlinville kept changing. While Margaret's story stayed frozen in time, Highway 47 was widened and repaved. New businesses came and went, and familiar landmarks disappeared. The old Keller barn, where volunteers had once gathered for search briefings, finally collapsed in a windstorm in 1981. Jacobson's filling station became a modern stop-and-go convenience store, glowing with bright fluorescent lights and equipped with security cameras, technology that didn't exist when Margaret vanished. The Thompson farm, the site of the last party she ever attended, was sold to developers. In its place, rows of identical ranch houses with neat lawns and two-car garages appeared, erasing the farmland where searchers once combed for clues. As time moved on, so did the people. Many of those who had known Margaret personally either passed away or moved away. Younger residents only knew her name as a local legend, the beloved teacher who disappeared without a trace. Parents would sometimes share her story with their children as a warning about walking alone at night, but few truly understood the deep pain behind those words. For Dorothy Hamilton, Margaret's sister, time did not heal the wound. It simply made it quieter. Dorothy lived alone in the White House on Elm Street for decades, surrounded by memories that refused to fade. She kept Margaret's bedroom exactly as it had been, year after year. Her clothes hung in the closet. Her books remained neatly stacked on the nightstand. A hairbrush still lay on the dresser, as if she might return at any moment. Dorothy never married, and those who knew her said she carried both love and sorrow in her eyes. She never stopped hoping for answers. Dorothy passed away in 2003 at the age of 74, quietly in her sleep. After her death, the house on Elm Street was sold to a young couple from Springfield. When they began packing up Margaret's room, they realized it had been untouched for 46 years. Her clothes were donated to charity. Her books were sent to the library, and her personal papers and photographs were given to the local historical society. The White House received a fresh coat of paint and a renovated kitchen. New hardwood floors replaced the old carpet. Slowly, every physical trace of the Hamilton sisters disappeared, except for a small headstone in Oak Hill Cemetery that read, "Margaret Hamilton, beloved sister, 1934-1957. Gone but not forgotten." By 2005, the case was considered ancient history. New crimes, new investigations, and modern challenges had buried it under decades of files. It only lived on in the hearts of a few old residents and among amateur crime enthusiasts who discussed unsolved mysteries on internet forums. Occasionally, someone would post about Margaret's case, sharing old newspaper clippings and speculating what might have happened that night. But there were no new leads, no new witnesses, and no hope that the truth would ever be found. Then came Detective Lawrence Gallagher, a man who couldn't forget a case he had never even worked personally. Gallagher joined the Illinois State Police and spent 32 years investigating murders across central Illinois. He was respected, methodical, and known for his determination. When he retired in 2006, he expected peace. Instead, he found himself driving past Carlinville, thinking about the Margaret Hamilton case, the one that had crossed his desk back in 1989 during a routine cold case audit. He had spent 2 weeks reading through the original files, witness statements, and coroner's notes about the unidentified bones found in the woods. Something about the case wouldn't let him go. He believed, deep down, that the original investigation had missed something important, and now, for the first time in decades, someone was willing to look again. By 2008, more than 50 years had passed since the night Margaret Hamilton vanished. For many in Carlinville, her story was a distant memory, something their grandparents whispered about, but no one truly believed would ever be solved. The dusty file sat forgotten in the county archives, its papers yellowed and brittle, its photographs faded with time. Then came a statewide cold case initiative, a new program launched by the Illinois State Police. The idea was simple but powerful: revisit old unsolved crimes using modern forensic tools that didn't exist in the 1950s and 60s. DNA testing had revolutionized investigations across the country, solving murders that had been cold for decades. Detectives hoped that, buried among the thousands of forgotten files, there might be cases that still held hidden answers. Among the stack of cases was a folder marked in faded ink. Hamilton, Margaret, missing, 1957. Detective Lawrence Gallagher, now semi-retired but still working as a consultant on cold cases, recognized the name immediately. He had reviewed the case briefly back in 1989 but never had the resources to pursue it. Something about Margaret's story, a beloved teacher disappearing on a quiet November night, had stuck with him all these years. When he saw the file again, he didn't hesitate. He picked it up and said simply, "Was Sarah going to look at this one again?" Gallagher began by carefully reviewing every page of the original investigation. He read the witness statements, the search logs, the early leads, and the follow-up notes written in blue ink by Sheriff Walsh in the 1950s. He noticed details that earlier investigators hadn't been able to act on. For example, the search team had discovered partial human remains in Morrison's Woods, a few miles outside of town, in 1961, but at the time, forensic testing couldn't confirm who the remains belonged to. Those bones had been carefully stored in the state's evidence archives, and Gallagher realized they might now hold the key. DNA testing on skeletal remains was routine in 2008, so he submitted a formal request to have the old bones sent to the Illinois State Police Crime Lab for testing. It would take weeks, maybe months, but for the first time in decades, the case had movement. Meanwhile, Gallagher reached out to the Hamilton family, or what was left of it. Dorothy, Margaret Sipp's sister, had died in 2003, but a distant cousin, living in Iowa, agreed to provide a DNA sample to help identify any remains. She said quietly over the phone, "Margaret Sipp's story has always been in our family. I never thought I'd see the day anyone would reopen it." The lab technicians worked carefully, extracting mitochondrial DNA from the bone fragments. Unlike nuclear DNA, mitochondrial DNA can survive for decades and is passed down through the maternal line, making it useful for old cases like this one. Weeks passed. Gallagher waited anxiously for the results. Then, one crisp October morning, he received a call. The lab results were back. The bones found in Morrison's Woods in 1961 were a mitochondrial DNA match to Margaret Hamilton's maternal line. After 51 years, her remains had finally been identified. Gallagher sat quietly at his desk for a long time. It wasn't joy he felt, it was a deep, quiet sense of justice. Margaret had a name again. She was no longer just unidentified remains. She was Margaret Hamilton, the young teacher who vanished into the night. The news spread through Carlinville like wildfire. For older residents, it brought back memories they had long buried. For younger people, it was a shock to realize that the mystery they had grown up hearing about was suddenly real again. The local paper ran a headline the next day, "Margaret Hamilton Sets Remains Identified. Case reopened after 51 years." Detective Gallagher knew this was only the first step. Finding Margaret was important, but now the real work began. Someone had taken her life, and that person had lived freely for decades. Gallagher promised himself he wouldn't let the case go cold again. He requested the entire original evidence box, including photographs, letters, and personal belongings collected in 1957. He began making a timeline, piecing together Margaret's final hours. He listed every name mentioned in the original witness interviews. Many of those people were gone now, but some had left behind statements, letters, or family members who might remember something. For the first time in over half a century, the town had hoped that answers might finally be found. What had once seemed like a mystery buried in the past was now alive again, and Detective Gallagher was determined to uncover the truth. Detective Lawrence Gallagher's work had already given Margaret Hamilton her name back, but now he wanted to give her the truth. After identifying her remains in 2008, he spent months digging into every piece of information the original investigation had left behind. Most of the people who had been adults in 1957 were gone, but old files can sometimes talk louder than living witnesses. One rainy afternoon in March 2009, Gallagher sat alone in the county records room surrounded by stacks of dusty boxes. As he flipped through a bundle of loose papers, he came across something that caught his eye, a handwritten letter dated February 1958. The letter had been sent anonymously to the sheriff's office at the time. The shaky handwriting described an argument between Margaret and a local man near the grain facility just hours before she disappeared. Strangely, the letter had been marked "not verified" and filed away, never followed up on. Back then, small-town investigations relied heavily on personal testimonies, and anonymous tips often weren't taken seriously. But Gallagher knew that even the smallest lead could unlock decades of silence. The letter mentioned a name: Walter Fitzgerald. Gallagher's pulse quickened. Walter Fitzgerald wasn't a stranger to the town. He had been a respected local businessman, the owner of a farm supply store, and a well-known figure in the community during the 1950s. At the time of Margaret's disappearance, Walter was in his late 20s, charming, confident, and well-liked. But Gallagher also found rumors tucked away in old statements, women mentioning how Walter would sometimes follow them or make them uncomfortable. Nothing was ever proven, and no formal complaints were filed. In a small town in 1957, such behavior was often ignored. Gallagher started building a timeline of Walter's life. He discovered that Walter had continued living in Carlinville for decades. He married, raised children, and eventually became a prominent figure in the local Rotary Club. He passed away in 2007 at the age of 79, just 2 years before the case reopened. To the town, he had been a respected citizen, but Gallagher suspected that Walter had been hiding a terrible secret for most of his life. With Walter gone, Gallagher turned to old acquaintances, neighbors, and surviving family members. He located Walter's niece, now living in Florida. When Gallagher spoke with her, she revealed something chilling. She remembered overhearing her uncle talking one night after drinking heavily. He had said something along the lines of, "She wouldn't stop screaming. I had no choice." At the time, she was just a teenager and didn't understand what he meant. The family brushed it off as drunken rambling, but now it felt like a dark confession hiding in plain sight. Gallagher returned to the grain facility site mentioned in the letter. Most of it had been demolished and rebuilt over the years, but the general layout remained. According to the original search logs, that area had only been briefly checked. It was near this site that Walter had reportedly been seen talking to Margaret on the night she vanished. By cross-referencing the timeline, Gallagher concluded that Walter Fitzgerald was the last known person to see Margaret alive. He built a comprehensive case file: old witness statements, the anonymous letter, new interviews, and the DNA match of Margaret Sipp's remains. If Walter were alive today, there would be enough evidence to arrest him for Margaret Hamilton Sipp's murder. The official report stated that Walter likely confronted Margaret that night, possibly over a personal disagreement or unwanted advances. When she resisted, he attacked her and transported her to Morrison's Woods, where he buried her remains. For 51 years, Walter had lived freely, attending church, running his business, and shaking hands at community events, all while carrying a horrifying secret. When the news broke publicly, it shocked the entire town. Older residents struggled to accept that a man they had trusted had been capable of such violence. For Margaret's distant relatives, the revelation brought a mix of emotions: pain for what she suffered, anger that justice came too late, and relief that the truth was finally known. Gallagher held a quiet press conference where he said, "We can bring Walter Fitzgerald to trial, but we can bring Margaret Sipp's story out of the shadows, and sometimes that sets the justice time allows us." The anonymous letter, once dismissed, had become the key to unlocking the entire mystery. One forgotten piece of paper, a persistent detective, and modern science had finally revealed what had been hidden for half a century. In November 2009, Carlinville gathered in silence. The fall air was crisp, the trees along the streets were covered in golden leaves, and the town's small church was filled with people, some old enough to remember Margaret Hamilton, others who had only heard her name whispered over the years. For the first time in more than half a century, they were not gathered to search or to wonder or to speculate. They were gathered to say goodbye. After the investigation officially concluded, Margaret's remains were returned to her surviving relatives. A small but deeply emotional memorial service was held at Oak Hill Cemetery, where a simple headstone had marked her name for decades. This time, her remains were laid to rest beneath it, surrounded by flowers, candles, and tears. A local pastor led the ceremony, speaking gently about the long journey from mystery to truth. Many people who attended had never even met Margaret, but they came to honor her. Elderly residents shared stories about the kind young woman who used to teach their children, always with a warm smile and kind eyes. Some remembered her classroom, decorated with colorful drawings and maps. Others remembered the night she disappeared, how sirens echoed through the town, how search parties moved through the fields with lanterns, and how fear slowly turned into heartbreak when she was never found. The news of Walter Fitzgerald's involvement had shocked everyone. For decades he had lived among them, hiding the truth in plain sight. People wrestled with conflicting emotions: betrayal, anger, sorrow, and disbelief. Some had trusted Walter completely. They had done business with him, shared meals with him, even sat beside him at church. No one had imagined that behind his calm smile was a man capable of ending Margaret's life. Detective Lawrence Gallagher, the man who had refused to let the case stay cold, stood quietly at the back of the crowd during the service. He didn't speak publicly that day. He simply watched as Margaret was finally laid to rest with the respect she deserved. In his heart, he knew the case would always stay with him. It wasn't just about solving a mystery. It was about bringing dignity back to a forgotten victim. After the service, Gallagher spoke briefly to a local reporter. His voice was calm but emotional. "We can turn back time. Walter Fitzgerald died before he could face trial. But today Margaret Sett's name has been cleared. She Sett's no longer a missing person. She Sett's no longer a file sitting in storage. She Sett's a woman whose story has finally been told." The town slowly began to heal in ways it hadn't realized were needed. Old residents felt a sense of closure that had been missing for decades. Younger generations who had grown up hearing bits and pieces of the story finally understood its full weight. The mystery that had hung over Carlinville for 51 years was no longer a shadow. It was a part of history that had finally been illuminated. The cold case team received letters from across the state, thanking them for their work and sharing how Margaret's story had inspired renewed hope in other unsolved cases. Families with their own unanswered questions began reaching out, asking if their loved ones' cases could also be re-examined. Margaret's case became more than just one woman's story. It became a symbol of persistence, proof that even after decades the truth can still rise to the surface. A small plaque was later placed near the old grain facility, the last place Margaret was seen alive. In memory of Margaret Hamilton, 1934-1957. A teacher, a sister, a daughter, and a light that was never forgotten. May her story remind us that truth has no time limit. For Detective Gallagher, closing the case was bittersweet. He had found answers, but he wished they had come sooner, when Dorothy, Margaret's sister, was still alive to hear them. Still, he knew that justice isn't always a courtroom verdict. Sometimes, it's uncovering the truth after years of silence. Sometimes, it's giving a name back to someone who was lost. As the sun set over Oak Hill Cemetery that evening, the last few visitors lingered near Margaret's grave. Flowers lay neatly in front of the stone. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees. For the first time in 51 years, the town of Carlinville was quiet, not because they had no answers, but because they finally did. Margaret Hamilton's story is a reminder that time may pass, but the truth never disappears. It waits, buried beneath years of silence, until someone is willing to dig deep enough to find it. Her case proves that justice is not always swift, but with persistence, even the coldest cases can be solved. If you found this story powerful, make sure to subscribe and stay with us as we continue to uncover more forgotten cases and hidden truths. Share this video so Margaret's story is never lost again, and let us know in the comments what case you want us to cover next. Your support helps bring light to stories that deserve to be told.